want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We're delighted to welcome you to the Natural History Museum and to this brand new Commons Theater. Our new discussion series, Elephant in the Room, Small Talk, Big Issues, tackles thought-provoking and sometimes controversial topics in the museum world and elsewhere. This year, the series complements NHM's latest exhibition, Reframing Dioramas, The Art of Preserving Wilderness, which offers a fresh perspective on these iconic and historic displays, and which will be on view following this discussion if you didn't get a chance to check them out before the talk right now. Now, on behalf of the museum, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the Elephant in the Room series this season. As a neuroscientist turned science communicator, she strives to bridge the gap between science and culture and is driven by the belief that science isn't just for scientists and has the power to connect people and communities. Please give a big hand to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Yewande Pierce.
Thank you, Marisol. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Elephant in the Room, Small Talk, Big Issues. It's so good to see so many of you for our final evening discussion in this series. It's been incredible, and we've really been looking forward to this final discussion. So the discussion title for this evening is The Many Faces of Conservation. Environmental conservation work is as important today as it has ever been, and recent natural disasters only amplify how critical conservation efforts are. So in this discussion this evening, we'll explore the ways in which art, science, and culture can inform the future of conservation, from artistic representations in museums to boots-on-the-ground research and indigenous knowledge. Conservation is really a community effort. How can differing perspectives work hand in hand to tackle the biggest challenges facing conservation efforts today? That's the question that we're reflecting on this evening. So in this talk, we'll acknowledge the many faces of conservation and what the future may hold by working together to make lasting change. So I'm really excited to welcome our 4 guests this evening. This is the largest panel we've had so far. Starting with Lauren Scoth, LA native artist. She uses digital, multimedia, and immersive storytelling to engage communities and inspire change. Her piece, The Ever-Changing Flow, bridges art, science, and technology to promote ecological stewardship and sustainable urban development, encouraging collective action towards restoring the LA River and fostering a more connected future. And that's on display in the Reframing Dioramas exhibition, if you haven't checked it out yet. Heidi Lucero is an indigenous anthropologist and an enrolled member of the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, a Hashiman nation and descendant of the Mutsun Ohlone tribe of California. She is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and most likely descendant of the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, a Hashiman nation. Welcome, Heidi. Dr. Daniel Cooper is a principal conservation biologist at the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. His work involves habitat assessments for agencies, nonprofits, and private clients, and is one of the Biodiversity Expert Council for the City of Los Angeles. And last but not least, Rudy Ortega Jr. is the tribal president of the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, a native sovereign nation of North Los Angeles County. As the elected leader of his tribe, Ortega Jr. oversees the governmental body and manages affairs pertaining to the rights of all Fernandino Tataviam people. He is also the first Native American to serve on the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority governing board. Thank you all for joining this discussion this evening. Okay, so a big round of applause for our guests this evening. So for this Elephant in the Room series, I think that the best place to start is really thinking about our overarching question, which is who decides what we preserve and also how. So I wanted to start off our discussion thinking a little bit about indigenous knowledge, conservation ethics, and this whole idea of decision making when it comes to the land that we're inhabiting. So I'll start with you, Rudy. As the first Native American to serve on the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority Governing Board, you're working to open more channels between tribal communities and major conservation agencies. And this is really significant because conservation policies have historically excluded indigenous voices, even though indigenous communities have practiced sustainable land management for millennia. So beyond just consulting tribes, what concrete steps must agencies take to ensure indigenous leadership isn't just invited, but actually empowered in the decision-making process?
Well, thank you for that. And yes, and it's wonderful to be here this evening and having part of this panel discussion. For me, to serve on MRCA and other agencies that I serve on to provide the voice of indigenous tribes in California is vital and important. And to have a more meaningful conversation than just a regular tribal consultation, it's of the essence. For me, serving on MRCA, we were able to bring the first tribal liaison on board to hire. So it's an individual who's California native himself, who's working with the tribes in the Orange County and area to talk about access and land. Mm-hmm. So there's principles to understand that, there's access to properties, which we all do. We have access to. We can all hike these open properties. But more significantly, why is it such importance for the tribe is the fact that we were revoked from accessing these lands to do ceremony, to do cultural harvesting, to do cultural practices and teachings. So when we talk about those consultations, we want to bring the value of what that access is. And to also have a bit of privacy when we do the ceremonies. We're talking about aging ceremonies, sacred ceremonies that are important and vital to the tribe's existence. And today, there's many tribes in California that are both federally recognized and non-recognized. But bottom line, it's history in California that serves that we were tribes before the founding of the United States, before California, and before the Spaniards arrived. And so that ended a lot of our cultural aspects of traditions. We had to adopt different access, different religious practices, and so on. So having that access and having the consultation and with a meaningful effort is the most pivotal part of our tribes to have the conversation for both tribes that are federally recognized and non-recognized. It doesn't determine your sovereignty. The tribes are sovereign regardless of the federal status, because here in California we share these lands, and we should have the conversation about how we have access to these lands as well.
Thank you, Rudy. And also, I think we might have a slide that, if we could just pull it up. One of the things that you mentioned is really connecting with community, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of bringing in different tribal voices. That doesn't mean just one tribe. That's a lot more complex than a lot of people might think. So could you just talk us through a little bit about the many?
No, definitely. Here we have one of the things as a tribal leader. I've sat in front of many supervisors and many elected officials for my last 30 years, 40 years. My father was the tribal leader for 5 decades, and I stood beside him in many meetings since I was a child. And so when I hear these individuals say, who makes up the tribe? Who is the tribe? And then they see my face, they know my father, because my father has legacy in the county of Los Angeles as well. They know us, and they know my family. However, they don't know the people of my tribe. So one of the things here in this photo, you see the tribal community today, who they are, who they represent, and they walk the streets of Los Angeles, they walk the streets of the county of Los Angeles, and these are the people that engage in everyday life. We even had comments about what is our food intake. Some of our people go to McDonald's, right? We have Starbucks.
It doesn't.
Right? And it's as funny as it sounds, we're humans, and we share in today's society and in today's economy. So this is what that first slide shows, is that tribal community striving to continue the existence, what our heritage is, and who we are as cultural people.
And if we could go to the next slide, just thinking, this blows me away, because this is really about territory, and I would love for you to just unpack this a little bit and what we're seeing here.
Sure, sure. You know, this territory of ours has about 5 different regional groups of people that spoke multiple dialects of languages. It's both Chumash language as well as a Toktik language, and the Toktik language is 2 branches of the Toktik languages. So in these regional groups, which doesn't show here, but it shows multiple villages, and so each has a social interworking with one another. So my family descends from the village of Situkanga, which is in Sino, the village of Tochonanga, which is over by Newhall, which is present-day Magic Mountain, the village of Chaiwananga, and then we have 2 other lineages that survive. So out of all of these lineages here, this is only a fragment of what we have. There's over 200 villages that were taken to Mission San Fernando. And this shows the glimpse of what that is. This is Fernandino territory along with Tatavium territory. And so that's what we show. We're a coalition of multiple lineages that were brought to Mission San Fernando. And out of that 200 lineages of 200 villages, only 3 survive today. And so that shows a significant impact. In the recordings of Mission San Fernando was 2,995 Indians, 3,006 fully baptized people that were identified there. Those other individuals were Spanish or mixed blood, but the 295 were all native people that were baptized in Mission San Fernando.
Wow, that's
So this just shows our territory. Obviously, this is ours, but there's overlapping with the neighboring tribes of Chumash and Gabrielino as well, that we are always in tribal consultation with one another when areas come up in discussion. So it's an always, just like any nation, just like the U.S. as we hear today with Mexico and Canada, it's the same concept as these tribal nations as well.
And these are all of the voices that are important to integrate when talking about those decision-making points. If we could just go to the next slide, just wanted to talk a little bit as well about this idea of the land return and that being a focus as well in sort of your mission.
Yeah, you know, the map that I showed you was ancestral native lands. It was pre-contact. So here we're looking at during Spanish contact and the Mexican contact. And what you're seeing is actually land grants during the Mexican era. And so in that time, the Encino, Rancho Encino was actually land granted to my family. My great-great-grandmother, Maria Lipas, her father, Francisco Papa Bubaba, actually first name is baptized name, Papa Bubaba is his traditional name. But his father-in-law, Tribucio Cayo, who was Chumash from Simi Valley, from the village of Tapu, had the land granted from the missionaries. And so he had that acres of 4,000 acres in the southern portion of San Fernando Valley. And then the northern portion, which has a grant of 40 petitioners. There were 40 tribal captains. We call them captains. Other people call them chiefs or leaders. But in our traditions, in Spanish, who recorded the language first, call them captains. And then on that is a list of the 40 captains who signed for the acreage of right in the center of the San Fernando Valley. So this shows that the tribe has always advocated for land and make sure it was preserved in our tribal people's hands. So it goes back from time immemorial, right, into the time of contact. So it's not a new coin today of land return. It's a continuous existence of argument and a discussion, really, more than an argument, about having land access and land in our own possession as well. So that's what this shows here. We had over 18,000 acre tribal people.
Wow, and we'll come back to talking about land access as well. And I think this idea about stewardship of the land and sort of having to, this whole process that you walked us through to actually have the land back, but also in the midst of that still continuing to be a steward for the land. I wanted to now ask you, Heidi, much of your work is really deeply connected to community action through education, advocacy, and hands-on restoration. I think that's what you're really known for. And I mean, I was surprised, somewhat naively, to discover that there's no federally recognized tribal land in LA or Orange County, which means that indigenous communities have to fight for access to their own ancestral spaces, as Rudy was just talking about now. So how does this affect efforts to restore care for the land, keeping that in mind, that that's a fight? And what strategies have been most effective in securing land access for indigenous land conservation in your
I think that's a surprise for most people that there are no federally recognized tribes in LA or Orange County, although those tribes have been fighting for federal recognition since the beginning of the state of California. We have fought for our land. We've been to Washington, D.C. We've applied for federal recognition. I know that Rudy's in the process of federal recognition, as well as my tribe in Orange County. And so for us is to maintain this presence. You know, that's the way that we're going to continue to move our tribes forward, move you know, our community, keep them involved, making sure that we're always present for these fights that are going on, and make sure that we're involved in stewarding the land and continuing to bring forward our traditional ecological knowledge that is really important for our people. For thousands of years, we tended this land, and we tended it well. We tended it, it worked for us. We'll talk a little bit later about fire management, which is something that was outlawed, but those processes took care of this land for thousands of years before contact, and those processes are what is going to continue this land to be rich and fruitful for generations to come.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Heidi. And we will get into sort of some of those practices about care for the land and helping to not just kind of respond to natural disasters, but also just prevent them. So we've just talked about kind of indigenous stewardship of the land, but Lauren, Dr. Cooper, through your project The Ever-Changing Flow, Lauren, and then with your work with the Resource Conservation District, Dr. Cooper, you've both actually collaborated with local indigenous communities quite closely to strengthen your own personal connections to the land. So I'm wondering how this has shaped your approach to empowering people to recognize their own personal stakes in conservation in a sense of more kind of collective stewardship. So if you're not native, you can still steward the land and still care for the land. So Dr. Cooper, I'll start with you maybe.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you. I think there's just a strong desire of the public to do something. We've heard the term biophilia. It's just like an attraction to nature.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's hard to deny. And in LA, I think it's seen with you know, especially during COVID, our natural area is just overrun with people. It's like almost being loved to death. But I think it does reflect this need we have as Angelenos to just go outside and enjoy nature. And I think that, you know, we're never going to stop that. So I think we have to embrace it, but we also just have to, it's our responsibility, I think, as conservationists to open the discussion to what is nature? You know, what are we saving? What is the baseline condition that we're kind of restoring to? And I think these are all important questions to debate and talk about. And, you know, I've seen a lot of evolution of thought of this in the last 20, 30 years that I've been involved in conservation. And, you know, it's still an ongoing process. But I think that certainly RCD, you know, our work involves a lot of restoration of oak woodland and just getting people out from the city where they live to the open spaces that we have, that we're really blessed with all around LA.
Yeah, we are surrounded by so much beautiful nature. I think that's a good point that you made as well about what is nature, just defining it. And I mean, your career is as a conservationist, but would you say, I mean, can we be conservationists? I don't know if a lot of people identify themselves in that way and realize that it's not just necessarily for entertainment to be in nature, but a connected sort of investment in it to take care of it.
Yeah, you can be a conservationist. It's okay.
I feel like let's call ourselves
we can all be
conservationists.
Yeah, exactly.
Lauren, you have your diorama is incredible, and we'll talk more about it in detail. But there's a little bit of background story as well to how you sort of went around collaborating and connecting with indigenous communities to strengthen your connection before doing that work. So I'd love to hear sort of how that has shaped your idea of advocating for us all to be more stewards of the land.
Thank you. It was extremely important to me to include the Native community and basically get their blessing on the vision that I was trying to put forward. And so I invited a representative to come, and we did prayers and offered songs, and that really touched me in a way that I would think that I can look to the Native community to tell stories, to take agency, and really identify with nature, where I feel like a lot of the time we think of ecology or just the word eco in it of itself as out there, but it means home, right? So we are a part of it, and we're part of that story. And so I wanted to encourage people through my diorama to be inspired to take part in that story and to see themselves in it, and look to the Native community as a way to take agency and see how they can contribute by creating our story now and looking at also vision. We can look to the Native community too, of being able to tell stories and see a vision. And so when we think about Los Angeles in 50 years, what do we see? And how do we contribute to that? And that's taking place right now. And so that's part of our legacy. And so I hope to inspire people to take action now, and get informed about the things that are happening right now, so that way we can contribute to the restoration of this land.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think that's a really great segue to our next topic, which is really talking about the power of the intersection of art and conservation, which has been an overarching theme, not just for Reframing Dioramas, but this whole discussion series. Communicating the importance of nature and inspiring action through storytelling is where I feel like art does a fantastic job of doing that. And the LA River was once a thriving ecosystem, but then urbanization and flood control transformed it into this concrete channel, cutting it off from its natural flow. So it's hard to kind of think of it as nature anymore. But the ever-changing flow project that you have right now on display traces the evolution of the LA River over time in a really powerful way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your inspiration, but also your intention for creating this project, and what you hope people will take away from seeing the diorama.
When I was developing my concept, I was looking for topics that had to do with colonialism, habitat change, habitat restoration, and I figured, well, I don't have to look too far. What about my hometown, Los Angeles? Yeah. And so I did a deep dive. If we can put the first slide up. Yeah. This inspired me when I was doing my research. So what you're looking at here is basically the population influx over 150 years. And we can see how rapid this happened. And when more and more people started coming here, we started losing more and more of our habitat. And so this is a depiction of what our priorities were at the time, which was rapid urban development. So we can go to the next slide. And so when I was putting together what it could look like in the future, I had to look back first. So what did it look like to begin with? And so this image here is a depiction of pre-colonial time, and image over here is a depiction of present day of the Verdugo Wash confluence. And so I picked this perspective very intentionally because the EPA actually put some funds to go towards a feasibility project where we could say, all right, how would it look to actually develop this particular space that is actually Frogtown, if you're familiar with it, and being able to develop that into habitat restoration. So my goal was that people could recognize themselves and say, wait a minute, I drive by there all the time, right. And really it was a beautiful riparian habitat that we're very disconnected from that reality. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a little bit of my creative process of how I was able to get the scope of my diorama. And you'll see here, bottom, which would be your right, bottom right, is a map that was made in the late 1700s, mapping out the territories when the Spanish were coming through. And the top right is a satellite image with an ecological map laid over it. And then I took that information and laid it over GIS data to put it into a 3D scope. So that way I could actually create the visual of not only the past but the future into this hero perspective. So this is a drone shot of our beloved Los Angeles. And so it speaks to how we can contribute to making the reality of what is now to the future vision. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is a depiction of what it could potentially look like.
Beautiful.
Of habitat restoration. And so I hope people come away with it inspired to be curious of how they can adapt and change perhaps their priorities and look at what our priorities are today. Yeah. Is it rapid urban development, or is it getting back in nature? Is it having access to land? Is it being able to be with our community and advocating for that?
Yeah, what I love about it is it has this nice optimism that, it's really powerful, and it often holds up a mirror and makes us look at ourselves. And when you see kind of the habitat loss and what's become of the LA River, it is like, wow, okay, this should be motivation to do something. But more powerful, I think, is actually having real data that you've used to show how we could get there and that it is possible and that you could end up with something restored like this.
Yes, so we need more access to land. We need to be able to put our feet in the grass. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Dr. Cooper, have you seen any artists engage with the LA River, and what untapped potential do you see for art to truly support environmental restoration and the role it plays?
Yeah, I think it's critical. We were talking earlier about Friends of the LA River. I was involved in high school, back in the late 80s, early 90s, on the technical advisory board for Friends of the LA River. Because actually, Kimball Garrett, who was the collections manager at the museum for many years, he was their first choice, but he was too busy. And so he said, well, why don't you call this kid Dan Cooper? He'll probably do it. He's not doing anything else. So I joined up with Friends of the LA River, and at the time it was started by Lewis McAdams, who is an artist and poet and writer, a great writer, Birth of the Cool and other books. He passed away, but there's a park named after him in Frogtown. And for him, the river came first, but art was up there too. Mm-hmm. He understood that art was the way you kind of connect the hearts of Angelenos to this thing that was very abstract. We're talking about a concrete channel with a marsh in the middle of it. And for most people in LA, there was just nothing to compare it to. It wasn't part of their lives. But then obviously once you get down into the river, and especially down at the toe of the levee where you can't hear the traffic anymore. That was Lewis's sweet spot, right? Wow. That's what resonated with him. You want to get down below the noise of the traffic. And at that point, you saw the egrets and the willows and everything else. And I think, that it definitely inspired his art. And look at so much of the LA River is you enter through art. You have the beautiful iron gates with the heron designs, the Steelhead Park down in Oso Street, and all throughout LA, I think art and nature are just inextricably intertwined.
Yeah, thank you for that. Rudy and Heidi, art and storytelling are powerful tools in education, especially in indigenous communities. So have you both seen creative collaborations help indigenous narratives and conservation spaces as well? I'd love to hear of any examples. Heidi, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think that's actually how I started, is being involved in conservation. I began as a basket weaver and going out into the national forest and working with basket weaving materials and learning about them and learning about the plant communities, and then learning the native names of those and learning what other plants are there, what animals are, using those same plants. And it really taught me to love that area, to take care of it, and to advocate for it. And, now I work with the National Forest. We have an MOU with them, and the art of basket weaving, reviving that tradition, has really folded into all of these things that are involved in my life regarding conservation, my community, reviving all these traditions for my community, native foods. So these things have all just started as a basket weaver.
Yeah, so I mean, to Dr. Cooper's point, it's the fact that it's so interconnected and powerful, and it really gets to, I think, our heart. Like you had mentioned, the biophilia. Dr. Cooper, we just are drawn to nature. I feel like we're also just drawn to art in a similar way. Rudy, any examples that you've seen in how art is actually playing a really critical role in these conservation efforts?
As art, I mean, same thing. I resonate with Heidi, what she said. I think that a lot of our passion to the areas and what brought the vision, the audios of that nature sound. Yeah. So you can see a lot of filming that we've done for ourselves, telling our tribal stories. We use those areas. We film hawks. And it's done in film for us and many other spaces. But even in drawings or just regular artwork. But if you escape to the mountains or to the creeks or the areas, that's where even today in regular talent of artworks, you have music formed and written up because it's an inspirational area to go in there and to really be part of the nature itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about the inspiration, the intention, the reasons, the empathy, I guess, for nature and why we want to serve it. And I feel at this moment, this conversation is very timely because I'm sure that we're all still thinking about the wildfires at the start of the year. So, I mean, whilst acknowledging that we're in the midst of post-wildfire recovery in LA, we're still processing the scale of devastation, and it's important to recognize that they are becoming more frequent and intense due to climate change, which hopefully is forcing us to rethink conservation strategies. So as well as being inspired, there is actually a lot of urgency now as well. So Dr. Cooper, I was wondering if your thoughts on conservation in this moment are beginning to shift, and how, given that urgency.
Well, yeah, I think we just haven't processed it fully yet. I mean, it was such a shock to the system, I think, for everyone. And I just talked to my friends. I mean, if we grew up here, or if we've lived here for 10 years, we know people in both fire zones who were affected by this thing. It's inevitable. You know people.
Someone,
What's that?
I was just going to say, I feel like everyone knows someone.
Everyone knows people, right? And so this is affecting all of our lives. And LA is always depicted as being consumed by natural disasters in film. Like, that's the other thing we know. But I think, one thing that, so no, I don't have a lot of, brilliant thoughts on how we're going to come back from this. But I do look to, indigenous knowledge to kind of shape my thinking on it. And one thing that struck me right after Eaton Fire was this idea that for thousands of years, Native peoples lived on the land, and their connection to the land was extremely deep. They knew what every plant was, every use of every plant. They could identify birds, which we can't do anymore, most of us. I know. But their dwellings were temporary. Their dwellings were you could put them up and take them down very easily. And right now we're in a complete reversed order. Our dwellings are permanent and solid, and everything we have goes into them, and we know absolutely nothing about the land. So I think that, the solution is not to be exactly like indigenous people lived in the past. That's not how we're necessarily going to live. But there's so many important lessons to be learned, and I think the extent to which that can shape our thinking and our redevelopment, I think we'd be really well served to learn about that.
I think that's a really interesting point that you made about this reversal. And of course, our possessions and our things and our dwellings and our home is important to us. But I think it's really interesting that you've recognized that there is that reversal, that connection to the land is sort of switched. And Heidi, I wanted to talk now a little bit about that sort of prioritization with the frequency of wildfires increasing. I mean, it begs the question, like, what proactive approaches do we need to help in these crises? But of course, indigenous communities have had the answer for how to prevent this. So you've been really actively involved in reviving ancestral traditions like basket weaving, which you've mentioned, and cultural burns, which we kind of hinted at the beginning. And these have all been long integral practices to indigenous land stewardship. So could you explain the historical role of cultural burns, which maybe people aren't aware of, and why they were suppressed, but also why introducing them today is essential for ecological resistance and conservation? I think we have a slide as well to bring up.
Sure. So for thousands of years prior to colonization, indigenous people all over the United States practiced cultural burns. We would burn the fuels down to make new grass shoots come up. The smoke would help in our oak trees to keep out bugs and pests in the trees, so we would have good acorns. It would burn away any of those plants that you didn't want to get near, like poison oak. So we took care of that. And so it was an important practice that we practiced all the time. Once colonization occurred, fire was seen as something bad. They didn't understand the need for the fire. So over the last 150 years, we've had such really strict fire policies about burns, especially here in California, that it's allowed the leaf litter and the fuel to build up. So when we have fires, like we saw recently, those fires burn really hot and they are very catastrophic. When you have fires and cultural burns like we did traditionally, we would burn every year. The fuels were very low. The fire would be really short-lived and it wouldn't burn up into the canopy of the trees. And so working with the forestry, we have done cultural burns in our basket area. Burning in the basket area clears out old shoots. When we are, as a basket weaver, you want nice, straight, long shoots. So when you burn, it allows the room for those new shoots to grow really nice. It also gives nutrients back into the soil, and it makes for better growing. And they're not competing for space. So I have worked with the forestry to do some burns. This is one that we did. This is actually our basket area here. But one of the things we wanted to make sure that we took care of was this elderberry tree. Elderberry is a really important medicine plant. So we use the flowers, we use the berries, and then we also use the shoots, the new shoots that come up for our clapper sticks and for elderberry flutes. And so you can't even get to the base of that elderberry tree. So this was taken.
In the first panel.
Yeah. So this first one was taken before the burn. The middle photo was taken the day before the burn. So what we did is we went in and we worked with the forestry fire and CAL FIRE, and we talked to them about the importance of these plants, whether it was the juncus for our baskets or the Rus trilobata, the sumac, and what we use them for, why they were important, and so and the importance of the elderberry. So they came in, they trimmed the elderberry. There was a lot of broken branches and a bunch of stuff around. You couldn't even get into it. Kind of unsafe to be there, so they came in, we trimmed it, and then the next day we had our cultural burn. But this last picture is a year after the burn. You can see that you can get right up to the base of it. The elderberry tree is in full bloom. And we are actually out there doing not only using this space to gather plants, but we're also there removing. I actually have a bunch of my students there that came out to help me do invasive plant removal. And so they get extra credit for that. But it's a really great way to keep people involved. So it was everybody that was there from forestry, from the local fire community, my students and biologists, and so it was a great time. But it's amazing what one simple burn can do to bring back the health of a whole ecosystem there.
I was going to say, when you just compare panel 1 and 3, like, you can point out, you can circle all of the good things that came from that. Heidi just has spoken now about the importance of cultural burn in land stewardship and the steps that you had to take to be able to do this. I like the fact that you kind of had to explain the importance of this plant, so there was like an educational piece as well. But you've been working directly with forestry teams, Rudy, and basket weavers to influence policy on controlled birds as well. So what challenges have you faced in getting these traditional practices recognized and implemented? And do you see any progress in changing regulations or attitudes towards cultural burns?
Well, definitely. Last year, California passed a law, I believe SB 310, that granted tribes to do cultural burns. And prior to that, one of the things that was such a daunting task to get through and to have cultural burns is that, as Heidi mentioned, control burns were not prescribed, not issued out. And so those are two different methods and how it's being done. So cultural burns, as Heidi indicated, it's a lot of important factors of how it's done, what it's done, and it's in much more smaller scale than what the traditional control burns are about. And so having those access, and then in the urban areas, the difficulties is, as mentioned previously, there's no federally recognized tribes. And so we don't have reservation lands. If we had reservation lands, those burns would be done on reservation lands, but also we have to do it outside. And mentioned, so as you stated, the Eaton fire, the Palisades fires, those are issues. And so for tribal people, for us, a fire is kin. It's part of our nature of cycle. And as a relative, how you treat it is going to treat you back in that aspect. So if we're not maintaining and caring for the space of nature, it's going to come back rapidly, and as we saw, and it's going to be uncontrollable. For us, the LA Native community got together during the time of the fires and did a prayer circle for that, and to offer offering and traditions. And we brought Native people from the local tribes to other folks who live here in Los Angeles now from across the nation who has these traditions. So that's what that part is. And so having the understanding and education and component of why cultural burns are important, and each terrain is different. So they're not the same, very similar to one another. Northern California has different areas that how it burns differently than down here in Southern California. And so talking to the tribes and understanding the cultural burns, and some of this information, I have to say, has to be kept within the tribes, because it's cultural knowledge that these people have been taught from generation to generation. So it's a difficult piece, and that's what that bill passed, that we don't really have to say explainably why we want a cultural burn, just the fact that the cultural burn is of importance. Wow. And it's a tool that can be used from large defending wildfires, being emerging out or out of control.
Wow, and if we could pull up a slide, because cultural burns are a really important part of this, but Rudy, I know you've spoken about like land goals in general, and some of the goals that you prioritize in your communities prioritizing. Could we talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. One of the things is working with state legislators, looking at how we now access lands. And so the state of California is working with a lot of tribes, both federal and non-federal. And the rule that they passed is that the tribes have to create this conservancy outside of trust lands, right? So this way, these are California lands. If we go into legal aspects of it, to us, it's all Indian land, but in the documents, California land, this is Indian land or reservation land. So these are California lands that are open for conservatorship spaces. And so this year, we created our conservancy called the Tavium Land Conservancy. And it's to mentor the land. It's really to bring land back to the tribe so we can have our rules and our standing and principles and protocols onto these properties. And we want slide to the next slide. And you can see the amount of acres that my tribe received so far. So we've got about 516 acres of property in the northern portion of LA County. And here, we both use both sciences, native tradition science and modern technology science as well, to look at protecting the native species there from both animal and fauna of the plant species. So as we look at it, we can see that there's birds on this property that you won't see anywhere else. We even have certain fish species in the area that's nowhere else. And this is in a transverse area that, the western part is different from the eastern part. And so it's one of those things that we get to go back up to the mountains. We get to teach about it. We get to talk about the lands. And then on top, we have the language in our neighbor, which is the closest one, is the Katahanamuk language, which is part of Serrano language. So we renamed the mountain on top of that. And so that's what part of that capturing an area, and it's open, so it's public space. But it's limited. We restrict people to stay on trails. As you go to any national parks, right? You have to stay on a trail. Don't create a new trail.
There are rules.
Because we're protecting the native plant species. Yeah.
Thank you for walking us through that, and I mean, like sharing this idea of the cultural burns and like the different priorities. Dr. Cooper, I'm not sure if it is counterintuitive because it's very logical when you actually think about it, but fires are of course a very scary thing to us, and I'm just wondering if sort of having like a little bit more of that insight, how that changes sort of your idea about fire itself and conservation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it definitely flies in the face of kind of Western conservation ideas, which is you preserve land and you don't touch it. You do as little as possible.
Protecting the land.
Protect it. That's what you do. But certainly this idea that fire is your kin. I mean, this is such this idea that the natural world is inherent in you occurs in indigenous groups all over the world. I mean, this is just logical to most of the world and was for many, many years. A couple thoughts, in looking at this, our idea just of our natural spaces is based on the last 150 years. It's based on the post-Rancho era, which is, it's kind of like let the cattle graze. But then when we protect the land, we'll bring all the cattle off. And that's what happened in the Santa Monica Mountains. In the 80s, all the cattle was taken off the land. And so all the areas that had been grazed kind of reverted to this invasive mustard.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So now we have just weed fields everywhere. But what were they before? Well, they were grazed. But rewind a little bit before that, and you had black-tailed jackrabbits. Those are now gone. Those were chewing down and maintaining all that open land, combined with indigenous burning. So we had pronghorn antelope in the San Gabriel Valley. They would have been grazers. And so the whole our whole idea of what our pristine landscape is just needs to be constantly re-examined.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for framing it that way, and sort of, I think that's a really good point, and reminds me of something that you said kind of at the beginning of this discussion, Lauren, which is about how we even think about nature and where it begins and ends, and it being over there, but it's actually right here. And as we kind of wrap up the conversation, and now thinking about sort of what the calls to action are and collective action for lasting change. So, I mean, you've talked about how public spaces like museums can change our awareness, evidently from your diorama, and reshape our priorities. But yeah, how do we go beyond just sort of this idea of isolated wild spaces and start recognizing this integration within the cities that we live, and not just like, with the Santa Monica Mountains and removing the cattle? How else do you see that?
We have a lot of opportunity, actually, I believe, not only by supporting Native tribes and being able to be in those conversations, but by recognizing nature, seeing it where it is, right? So you're in downtown LA and walking down the sidewalk and you see a little weed, right? Springing up, but really that's just nature. That's not a weed. We've just labeled it as such, right? And you can show appreciation to it. Water the plants, but also staying active in your community, showing up to your local town halls and basically being
active in the community. If you want to see what's going to be happening in your town, your neighborhood, and being able to advocate for if a new building is being built, then perhaps on top of that building, they can plant plants on top of it, which would bring down our carbon emissions and would lend towards a conservation. When you think of conservation in of itself, it's conserving what we've already have, right? But we have lost 95% of our habitat. So we not only have to conserve, we have to restore by bringing in those opportunities, and then not only restore, but regenerate and look at it as a holistic way of relating to it, which again, the Native community does and doesn't say, I'm out there, or it's out there, I'm here. It's, no, we all play a part of it, and fire, it's my family, and recognizing that we are one with nature. So those ways, I believe that we can really advocate for not only habitat restoration, but also the regeneration of it as well.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think the conservation but the regeneration piece coming hand in hand is a really important point. And actually reminds me, Heidi, of another discussion that we did on specifically on wild harvesting, and something that you really drove home for me, which is this idea of reciprocity with our environment, like giving back to the land, plants and animals, they give back to us, which I think Rudy had said earlier in this conversation. So I think we have, because we're humans, this extractive lens, like how can it serve us? But yeah, rather than thinking about just saving nature, how do we foster a genuine reciprocal relationship with nature instead?
I think that's something that I always take into consideration when I go out. I mean, for me, going out into the national forest, going out, I think you put it great, going out and getting your feet in the dirt, your bare feet. I think that is something, that recharges me, that, fills my cup to go out there, not necessarily to go harvest together, but to go there and give prayers, to go there and make sure and, take care of the area, to go and do invasive plant removal, to, help the environment itself. So making sure that you're giving back in those ways, but also working with the broader community to help them develop an understanding of why it's important. So I think education is really one of those key elements that needs to be pushed more, is to educate not only, our tribal members, because a lot of them don't know, but also the broader community about why it's important to conserve those areas.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. And Rudy had emphasized earlier the importance of access as well. And in terms of a call to action, kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, if you don't mind the next slide that I have. So this one, this is actually my granddaughter here, and she's holding sage.
Oh, is it? Oh,
yeah,
beautiful.
And she reminds me every day when I wake up. She lives with me, with my daughter and her mother, that she's going to take over and be the boss. So I got a couple years before I have to term out on it. But that's what it is, though. It's about stewarding the land, that we bring our next generation to understand the purpose and understanding of land access and cultural easements and practices. And that's what we're fighting as tribes, and really, speaking to our counterparts in the state of California, right, in local agencies, to ensure that this is the important factor of it. Here we have all the different tribal organizations that my tribe established, and they're all vital to understanding nature. We have a youth diversion program in our nonprofit Buku that brings Native youth, indigenous youth, and just youth in general. They're the community from most different backgrounds and races that get to go up into the mountains who never see it. They're from the suburbs, they're from the apartment livings, and they have maybe a 2-acre park. So when they go up to the mountain, they see this vast terrain, they see hawks and spooked by the rattlesnakes at different times of seasons they get up there. But it opens their eyes. And I've seen where we took these youth, specifically from North Hollywood High, myself, when I was doing programming, these students that were like the D students, the F students, and during that course of half a semester, they raised their grades up by 2 points.
Wow.
So we see what nature can do and how it's inspirational and brings the light of life into people. And so that's what these organizations do that we have established. One is the Whole Lands. And I think the call of action is to share what the tribes are doing today, and tribes that have no federal status, like Heidi's and my tribe, to really support our initiatives. We're looking to retain land, to protect land, and educate people on the land. And we welcome everybody, right? Because that's the way we're going to be able to learn and steward the land much better, understand the practices, the vision that you have on how Los Angeles River would be is ideal, right? We drive around, we don't have enough greenery, we have a lot of concrete that now, today, myself being a part of the LA River Master Plan was, let's remove the concrete, right? So it's an order that we're looking at, but it's a lot of things that was done we thought was best, but today we're looking at it, it wasn't as best. And it's okay, because we're here to continue the educational componency and build the bridge to talk to each other. So the past four didn't talk to the tribes. In fact, they didn't want to see us. And that's the reality. But the times have changed, and now we're here and at the tables and having the conversation. That would be the call of action, is continue engaging the Native communities and participate and support them as well.
Well, thanks, Rudy, for sharing that. And I guess, yeah, if anyone wants to take a snapshot, someone at the front is already doing that. There we go. As we just wrap up, Dr. Cooper, I would love to hear your call of action. I think we have one slide that we wanted to also show. What should we all do?
Yeah, some of you may recognize this place. Drive by it every day on the 5. You know, when we were with FOLAR and then with other groups I've been with, we would go to these meetings with like public works officials, and, you know, they'd cross their arms and say no. And I just remember that when it was pointed out to me, like, they're paid to say no, they're going to say no. But I think we just have to say, why not, you know? And I think, you know, Lauren's exhibit is the perfect example of that. Like, why should we settle for this? Like, we have this right between the concrete, so why not? Let's just ask that. And I think when we have enough people doing that, then the people that are saying no will just be the outliers. You know, it just doesn't make sense not to do it. It makes a lot more sense to do it.
Yeah, I really love that message, and I love this visual. I actually don't know if people know that there's water in the LA River. I really don't. You know? No, they haven't cut us off. Like, maybe it's just something's happened. Well, thank you so much to our guests for the discussion this evening. The discussion's not quite over. We're going to go for the cocktail hour after this. We don't have time for a full Q&A here, but all of your questions are welcome during the cocktail hour shortly. So I'd just like to give another round of applause and a big thank you to our guests, Lauren Scoth, Heidi Lucero, Dr. Dan Cooper, and President Rudy Ortega. Thank you so much for joining us for the discussion. As a reminder for anyone who is new to the discussion series, you can join us in the African Mammal Hall until 9 p.m. for our cocktail reception and the opportunity to talk with our speakers. Thank you all for coming.